Today's passage is one that is probably familiar to a lot of you. It takes place right after that famous miracle where Jesus feeds the crowd of 5,000. 5,000 men, so including men, women and children. We're looking probably more at like 15 to 20,000 people. And he does it with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And this is one of the major miracles. In fact, it's the only miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, that appears in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, other than the resurrection. So it is a really it's an inflection point in Jesus' ministry. So this, our passage today, it comes right after that. After Jesus feeds the crowds, they are pumped. They just got a miraculous, crazy free meal, and they are ready to crown Jesus as king. And Jesus sees that they're trying to make him king by force. And he says, I can't do this. So what does Jesus do? He withdraws by himself to a mountainside, and he sends his disciples by boat to Capernaum. I think we have a slide. Yes, so the circle here, that is where the miracle takes place, and that is the Sea of Galilee. That's where the miracle takes place. Jesus kind of withdraws by himself, and he tells the disciples, get in a boat, I'll meet you at Capernaum. So in the next slide, you'll see kind of where Jesus sends them. That's the route that they are to take to get to Capernaum. Now, it's at the end of the day when the miracle takes place. So when the disciples get into the boat, John tells us that it was dark. It was dark when they got into the boat. And what happens is a strong wind blows and the waters become rough. Now, the Sea of Galilee, it can be very serene and beautiful. So if we see the next slide, this is what it can look like on a clear day. Beautiful, picturesque, serene, calm. But it's also known to become very turbulent very quickly. And the reason for that is it's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. And north of the sea, it's a very high mountain called Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon's peak is 9,200 feet above sea level. So what happens is cold air descends from the mountain, it crashes against the warm air at lake level, and what happens is violent storms occur. Suddenly, out of nowhere. So the disciples, they find themselves in the dark, in the middle of a violent storm. That is the setting for this miracle of Jesus. And I want to look at 3 aspects of the miracle today. First, a great anxiety. Second, a great fear. And third, a great peace. First, a great anxiety. This is obviously a very famous miracle of Jesus. Even if you haven't grown up in the church, even if you've never been to the church, you've probably heard that one of the miracles that Jesus did was to walk on water. And in my mind, the story kind of went like this. The disciples are in a boat, things get rough, then Jesus shows up walking on water to save the day. So the lesson for me was, be patient. Keep rowing. Wait for Jesus to come and help. Very clear and simple. John records this whole incident in just 6 verses. And yet, there's so much going on underneath the surface. And it helps to kind of look at the parallel passages in Matthew and Mark that also record this miracle to give us some more information. For instance, Matthew tells us that the miracle takes place during the 4th watch of night. The 4th watch is the last hours right before sunrise. So we're talking 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. The Sea of Galilee is only 13 miles long and 8 miles wide. 8 miles wide. So on a clear day, if you were in a rowboat just by yourself, you could row across it just you rowing in like an hour or two. It's not a huge sea. But what the clues tell us is that when Jesus shows up, the disciples had been rowing for at least 9 hours. 9 hours. And they had only gone about 3.5 miles. So they hadn't even reached kind of the midpoint of their destination, and they had been rowing for 9 hours. These are seasoned fishermen, very familiar with these waters. And yet they find themselves in darkness and turbulence, rowing and rowing and rowing and not getting any closer to shore for 9 hours. And what often happens in the miracles of Jesus, and in particular in John's Gospel, is the physical circumstances of the miracles often mirror an underlying spiritual reality. For instance, the wine at the wedding in Cana shows us that Jesus actually came to bring a spiritual celebration of joy. The paralyzed man at the pool in Bethesda was, his physical condition was he was paralyzed, but it pointed to our spiritual condition of brokenness. This man was looking to the pool to get healing, and in the same way, we look to the pools of career, relationships, money, pleasure, etc. to find healing. In John 9, you have the man who was born blind. The physical blindness pointed to a spiritual blindness that prevents us from seeing God. And what do we have in our passage today? We have darkness, the raging sea, wind, waves. We have desperation. We have exhaustion. We have futility. What we have here is a picture of life in this world. You know, God created this world to be good. He brought forth light that shined into the darkness. And if you look at Genesis 1 and 2, everything in creation, it goes from disorder to order, chaos to harmony, emptiness to fullness, formlessness to beauty. But because of sin, the created world is subject to a curse. And now there is decay. There is disease, there is death, there are natural disasters, there are volatile storms. 1 minute you're feasting, and the next you're on the brink of death. And that's what these disciples are experiencing. They had just witnessed this crazy miracle. They had stuffed themselves so full that they couldn't eat another bite. There were basketfuls left over. They were feasting, and just a few hours later, they are rowing for their lives. They're doing everything they humanly can, but they're not getting any closer to shore. One thing I love to do when I read biblical narratives is I like to put myself in the shoes of the characters. I try to experience what they're experiencing. I try to feel what they're feeling. And as I did that for this passage, you know what I felt more than anything else? Anxiety. Anxiety. Chaos everywhere. Complete darkness, winds blowing, waves crashing, frantic yelling, rowing desperately but not making any progress, uncertainty, absolute exhaustion, despair. The American Psychological Association defines anxiety as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure, I always thought that what the disciples felt was primarily fear. But given the long hours, the uncertainty, I think a more accurate emotion here, at least in the story, would be anxiety. Here's what the APA says about anxiety versus fear. Anxiety is not the same as fear, but they are often used interchangeably. Anxiety is considered a future-oriented, long-acting response broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is an appropriate present-oriented, short-lived response to a clearly identifiable and specific threat. So here's what that means. Your immediate emotional response to a specific threat is often fear. But a protracted, prolonged presence of an ambiguous or unresolved threat, that becomes anxiety. And as I was thinking about these disciples in this situation, it just felt so much like our everyday experience in the modern world. Here are some anxiety statistics from 2023. In 2023, 32.3% of adults in the U.S. reported anxiety and depression symptoms. 50% of adults ages 18 to 24 reported anxiety and depression symptoms. 45% of adults ages 35 to 44 reported a mental illness in 2023 compared to 31% in 2019. 37% of U.S. respondents indicated that they were more anxious in 2023 than in 2022. Over 40 million adults in the U.S. have an anxiety disorder, which is 19.1% of the population. The NIH estimates that 30% of teens in the U.S. will develop an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the world. What are some causes for anxiety? I think especially in an Asian American context, high expectations, pressures to succeed, a world that seems increasingly scarier and darker. And of course, social media. Being hyper-connected, it increases comparisons, it increases insecurities. And here's the thing about anxiety. Very often, you don't realize that you're anxious because often it just lies underneath the surface. You know, for me, I never thought I was an anxious person. I just thought, I have 4 kids. I'm a pastor. Life is hard. Just don't complain, just figure it out, deal with it. And I never thought that I was struggling with anxiety. And then I watched the Netflix show Beef. I'm friends with Jason, and I was talking to him a few weeks ago, and he told me he came and spoke at your retreat, and he had a great time speaking here. Jason was in that show as the praise leader, but I remember watching that show and feeling like, oh my gosh, that's me. I felt like I was seeing myself. I felt so seen in that moment and exposed, right? Like just the pressures of life, not knowing how to deal with it. For him, the character, he's massively depressed. He's like binge eating Burger King chicken sandwiches and attempting suicide. And then also just it explodes out in just anger because he can't keep it bottled in. Anxiety. If you've seen the movie Inside Out 2, they introduce a new character as she's entering puberty. And the new character is anxiety. And I love the way that anxiety is portrayed. Because anxiety is not portrayed as a villain. Anxiety is not a bad person, a bad character. In fact, anxiety is actually good. Anxiety is a great teammate, but a terrible team captain. When do things go off the rails? When anxiety takes control. But other than that, anxiety is helpful. It's necessary. But the problem is when it becomes too much and anxiety takes control. And I think living here in New York, New Jersey, the pressures to produce, prove, earn, succeed, they're even more pronounced than anywhere else in the country. The unending, unyielding pace and rhythm of life, it heightens the chaos and the tension. We work and we work and we work and we don't seem to be getting anywhere. So we feel helpless and hopeless all the time. We can't sleep, we can't rest, we can't enjoy life. Instead, we survive with this quiet desperation, fueling everything we do. You know, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened to the disciples. They've been in this situation before. In Matthew 8, they're also in a boat on the Sea of Galilee when a violent storm comes without warning. Same situation almost. You may remember the story, but the one difference is Jesus is sleeping in the boat. Somehow, he's asleep through the storm. And the disciples, they frantically wake Jesus up. Jesus, help us. Lord, save us. We're going to drown. Don't you care? And then Jesus wakes up. He rubs his eyes, and then he rebukes them. He rebukes the storm. The storm goes away. So the disciples, they know, even as they're rowing for 9 hours, they know Jesus can rescue us, but the problem is he's not in the boat with them. And isn't it true that in our struggles with anxiety, Jesus can often seem so far away? Yeah, it'd be fine if Jesus was here with me, but he's not. I don't feel him. I don't see him. I can't sense him here. As Christians, we know conceptually that we can trust in Jesus, that we don't have to worry about anything. We've seen his power in our lives in very real ways, but just like the disciples, we're often losing faith and forgetting his power and presence in our lives. We can't see in the darkness. The chaos is all around us. The waves are crashing. The wind is blowing. We're killing ourselves. We're rowing, and Jesus seems nowhere to be found. So we're anxious and we feel hopeless. I love how Mark tells this same story. In Mark chapter 6, Jesus is alone on land. The disciples are struggling on sea, but Mark tells us that Jesus was watching them row. The disciples can't see Jesus, but Jesus sees them. Jesus never lets them out of his sight. Even though they're not aware of it at all, he has his eye on them. He will never lose them. And then he walks out to them. Verse 19. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. The disciples finally see Jesus, but they see him walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and they're not like, finally, Jesus is here. We're rescued. We're saved. Jesus, thank you so much for coming. Can you please calm the storm? John tells us that they were frightened. And this is the first time he says this about them. They weren't frightened by the darkness. They weren't frightened by the wind. They weren't frightened by the waves. Anxious, I'm sure. But what was an anxiety is now a full-blown fear when they see Jesus. The disciples, they're not afraid. They're not really afraid. They've seen darkness. They've seen wind. They've seen waves. They're fishermen. They're not really afraid until Jesus shows up. Jesus' presence is not comforting or welcoming. It's traumatic. They have categories for darkness, for wind, for waves. They've seen those before, but a man walking on water, they've never seen anything like that. They don't have a category for something like that. This is something else. This is supernatural. This is transcendent. Verse 20, but he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Jesus tells them, "It is I." Now, on the one hand, he's telling them, "Hey, it's me, your friend, Jesus. I'm here." But there's another meaning to this, and we see this all over the Bible, and in the Gospel of John in particular. It is I in the Greek, ego eimi. In English, we all say, "It's me." But in the Greek, it's just, "I am." I am. And I am, in Hebrew, it is Yahweh. It is the divine covenant name of God. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is constantly using I am. He makes 7 big I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the gate, the light of the world, the vine, the way, the truth, and the life. In John 8, he's debating the Pharisees, and he tells them that Abraham saw Jesus, and he rejoiced. And they said, "How can Abraham know you? You're not even 50 years old yet. How can you say that Abraham knows you?" And here's Jesus' response. He says, "Before Abraham was, I am." And the moment he said that, the Pharisees, they all in unison pick up stones to kill Jesus. Why? Because it's very clear. Jesus is taking the divine, holy name of God upon himself. This is a name that the Pharisees, they wouldn't even read out loud because it was too holy. He takes that name and he says, "That's me." So when Jesus comes to them walking on the water, he's giving the disciples a glimpse of who he truly is. Not just a man, but the Almighty God. The creator of the world, the creator of the universe, the God who parts the sea, the God who commands lightning to strike. I am. There is no I was. There is no I will be. I simply am. Perfect. No beginning, no end. And if Jesus were to stop there, that would not be comforting. Because every time in the Bible, when people experience even a little bit of God's holiness, it's not comforting, it's deeply traumatic. Why do we feel anxious about ourselves? We feel anxious because deep down we're worried that we're not good enough. We're not beautiful enough. We're not smart enough. We're not valuable enough. That's why we feel anxious a lot. What happens to that anxiety when we're face to face with perfection? Imagine singing a Beyoncé song in front of her, or showing Steph Curry your three-point shot. "Hey, Scotty Scheffler, look at my golf swing." That's not fun. That's traumatic. I'm such a troll. I like to go to the golf range sometimes and just stand behind people and watch them swing. And it makes them nervous because someone's watching. Right? It makes them anxious. We're anxious because we're worried that we won't make it. We won't succeed. We won't be loved. We'll let people down. That doesn't go away when we come before God. That becomes worse. I said before that fear is an appropriate, present-oriented, short-lived response to a clearly identifiable and specific threat. There is nothing more threatening to us than divine holiness and perfection. The disciples, they appropriately fear a great fear when they see Jesus. The wind, the waves, the darkness, nothing compared to this threat. But my last point is a great peace. The good news in the passage is that Jesus does not stop with I am. He says, I am, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Fear not. This is the gospel. reconciliation with the Almighty God, righteousness before Him. We don't have to be afraid. The holiness, the righteousness, it's not a threat even to sinners like us. Jesus is the God-man. He's saying to his disciples, I am God, but also, hey, it's me, your friend, Jesus. This is Jesus' mission, to be the mediator between God and man, to bring us into a great peace with God. And how does he do that? Well, the way Jesus saves us is that on the cross, Jesus is swallowed up by darkness. Remember that at his crucifixion, a supernatural darkness descends upon the land. Jesus becomes the curse of sin so that he can reverse the curse of the fall. He becomes our righteousness so that we can stand righteous before the holy and almighty God. So when Jesus says, I am, fear not, it changes everything for the disciples. They are transformed. Take a look again at verse 19. They were frightened. He said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Right after that, then they were glad. Do you see the 180? Terrified, it is I, don't be afraid. Joy. Just like that. They go from fear to joy instantly. And I love that the circumstances haven't changed at all. It's still dark. It's still chaotic. The wind is still blowing. The waves are still rocking the boat. But immediately, because of Jesus, the anxiety and the fear are gone. Jesus doesn't still the storm first, and then the disciples are glad. The storm still rages, but they have met the Lord of the storm who comes to save them. Tim Keller, when he preached on this passage, he said this: Jesus doesn't minimize the storm, he maximizes himself. It is I. See me as the I am. That's how you deal with your storm. I love that. So the way we deal with the storms in our lives is maximize Jesus. You know, when Matthew tells the story, he mentions that Simon Peter, he gets out of the boat, he walks on the water to Jesus. But the moment he takes his eyes off of Jesus and looks at the waves, he begins to sink. How do we combat the anxiety in our lives? It's not by minimizing the things that are worrying us. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Other people are suffering way worse. Don't complain. Just get through it. We do that a lot, don't we? We try to minimize what we're going through. I can handle it. We fight anxiety and fear by maximizing Jesus and keeping our eyes fixed on him. Any football fans in the house? I think the scariest player to be is, I guess other than the quarterback, the kicker. The pressure that's put on an NFL kicker is crazy. They have one job to do that can swing the entire game. And the moment that ball is snapped, the entire defense, huge 300-pound men who are faster than I am, they have one objective: to kill you. The single most important rule for NFL kickers is this: don't look at the rush. Don't look at the rush. Keep your eyes on the objective. The moment you give in to your anxieties and fears, they will overwhelm you. Don't look at the rush. Now, in the Christian life, we don't all become hermits and monks and retreat from the world. I don't think we're called to ignore the storm entirely. There will be times where we need to row, where we need to figure things out. We need to adapt. We need to solve problems. But our ultimate objective, our hope, our focus must be on the great I am. He must be bigger to us than the rush. And we trust that he will ultimately get us to shore. I'll close with this. You know what I love? In Revelation 21, which the Apostle John also wrote, John sees a vision of the end and the new heavens and the new earth, renewed creation, the glorious destination for God's people. And in this vision, two things are conspicuously absent. Can you guess what they are? Verse 1 of Revelation 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And the city, verse 23, had no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. The two things that cause anxiety in our passage were darkness and the sea. John says that the sea will be no more, as will be the night. Now, I don't think if you love like deep sea fishing or surfing, it doesn't mean there's going to be no literal ocean in the new heavens and the new earth. But I think what they symbolize, what they represent, sin, the curse, uncertainty, instability, volatility, death, these things all have an expiration date, as does your anxiety. That day is coming when you will never have to worry or despair or mourn or cry or hurt again. And until that day comes, know that the Lord of the storm sees you and is with you. Do not take your eyes off of him. Let's cast our anxieties and fears upon Jesus, the Lord of the storm, who gives himself to us. Let's pray.